From the Multiply family of churches, we are Behind Open Doors, a podcast designed to take you behind the scenes, discovering what it takes to multiply disciples, leaders, and new churches. We're located in the U.S., the Hampton Roads region of Virginia. Visit us at multiplythechurch.com. My name is Aaron Denneny, Executive Director of the Multiply family of churches, and I am joined today by a close friend, partner in crime, fellow pastor, like a brother to me, Jordan Brown, one of the lead pastors here at OV Church. I said here, we're not here, but
I mean,
here you are.
we're where we are, right?
We are here together.
That's got to be here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, just a note, when I listen to the podcast, I usually listen to it at like 1.5 speed. So this is trippy right now.
Okay.
Like it's like slow motion. Here we are.
0.6 speed.
At multiplythechurch.com.
So you got my chipmunk voice then.
Yeah, well, it doesn't chipmunk you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it just takes the voice and like speeds it up.
Okay.
Real good. It's like, yeah, here we go. Find me at multiplythechurch.com. And here I am now with John. Wait, John?
Yeah.
Where's John?
John's not here. It's you today. So you've got to fill in the voice. You are the one who fills in the void today.
All good.
But man, we are so glad that you're here behind open doors with us again. You made an appearance on the first season. I think it was episode 2-ish.
It was, yeah.
Gospel fluency, I believe.
Yeah,
we
it
talked
was.
through some of that. And man, we just have really good conversations together. Some about things that don't matter at all.
I mean, they do matter.
All. And circles around 90s hip hop and Will Ferrell movies and all kinds of different
Bro, that stuff
things.
matters, man.
It kind of matters.
All conversations matter, bro.
Yeah, all right. I guess it can to a degree. We have some fun with it anyway. But we're going to talk about something interesting today that we believe is certainly on the heart of God and ought to matter to us, and that is unity in diversity, right? Unity in diversity, and we've had a conversation like this or around this topic multiple times together, and as we were kind of freshening up yesterday and thinking through some stuff. We just found ourselves going to places where we're like, we got to stop talking because this is going to be important for us to talk about fresh. So I'm excited to get into this topic today, unity in diversity. So help us think through first, what are we talking about exactly? When we say unity in diversity, that particular preposition is there. Right? It's not
unity of diversity.
Or unity on diversity or
from
diversity or whatever. It's unity in diversity. So what are we talking about right there? And what do you want to frame up for us in this conversation?
Okay. Well, even outside of anything that we would probably already be talking about in our current cultural conversation, I think unity and diversity, first and foremost, as believers, it surrounds what we would look at in the canonical Gospels, which is just the academic way of saying Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Why don't you just say that?
Because, dog, I'm a professor. Leave me alone. Anyway, but the interesting thing is I'm going to step outside of the professor stuff anyway and just completely hypocritically move all past that stuff.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's what we do, right?
That's right.
So I'm reminded of a movie. I don't know if you guys remember the movie Vantage Point. Had Forrest Whitaker in it. You know, I'm always a fan of beautiful actors that don't have edge ups. Just that's a me thing. But the movie itself is stop laughing. The movie itself is very amazing because it's action and it's explosion. But the thing I appreciate about it is it offers these multiple vantage points of this crazy event that happens, this explosion, right? And I was looking at it and, being amazed by all of the action. And I got a bit of a revelation in understanding that all of these folks would be able to tell this story and they have different viewpoints and none of them are wrong. They're just different, but they help to ultimately shape up or frame the entire story of what actually happened there. And likewise, when I think about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, since I can't be academic here, canonical gospels, I see the same thing. Each and every one of them, and this is why we call them the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with 4 different angles. It's the same story, but different vantage points, and no one's wrong. They're just different. And so we have to work through that and kind of begin the process of reconciling certain things. So I think we talked about it yesterday, for example, when you're looking at the Transfiguration, for example, and I can't remember exactly which 2 gospels. I think that Luke is personally right, but that's me. It talks about on the 6th day or on the 8th day, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, and they went up. And then you see what happens with the Transfiguration. And so we've got to configure within ourselves, how do we reconcile stuff like that? Or is it even worth reconciling? Because we know that it's still correlated with or directly related to the gospel message. And the gospel message is beautiful, and it is our power unto salvation, the reason why we're able to live and breathe today. And so we have to be able to celebrate those things. So that is the diversity. It's the different viewpoints that make up the ultimate unity that is what we believe about our faith. And so, I think we need to start there before we begin to break that down into, the different cultures, the different conversations, different schools of thought. And with that, I think we have the ultimate opportunity to really, like I said, comprehensively or well-round our viewpoints. So that we have things we can celebrate, even if we don't fully understand it, or we can agree, if nothing else, that if we're all on the same mission, sometimes that different viewpoint doesn't matter. I think that'd be the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that there are, in the gospel's case, there are these kind of 4 different viewpoints of what happened in Jesus' life and ministry, and this is their account. So whether one says it was 6 days later or 8 days later does not entirely matter in the grand scheme of the narrative, right? So what sort of like textual critics or even kind of doubters will say, skeptics will say, is, see, there's problems with that because the Bible doesn't agree with itself, so therefore it's not right and it's not trustworthy and all these things. But the reality is, what we're saying is the spirit of the law sort of approach of this
exactly.
is this. It may not line up in number. Like, was Jesus in the ground for 3 days? And what does that mean? Is that 3 entire 24-hour days? Or was he just in the ground for those touches of 3 days? So a part of one day, a full day, and a part of another day, which is the more kind of Jewish approach to him being there for 3 days.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And even with that's hilarious, because I know some camps that I've come from, they will talk about how the 3 days wasn't a full 3 days. Like, one is a proverbial 3 days because of the darkness and separation from God, even during the daytime when he was laid in the earth, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Is it worth having the conversation and majoring on minors and minoring on majors to sit up here and say, no, you're wrong?
Right.
Like, come on, dog.
Right.
Like, at some point in time, we got to call a spade a spade.
Yeah. And the point is, at some place, Jesus did die. He was put in the ground. He was raised from the dead, and ultimately sealing our reconciliation with the Father through faith in him. And so when we think, I've also heard the gospel illustration, like observing a car accident at the same intersection from 4 different vantage points, right? You have different views of who was maybe at fault or what happened, or this car hit this, and no, they turned here first, and whatever, and all that kind of stuff. But the point was, there was an accident and people were either hurt or not, or whatever the observations may become. So, and at least, at the very least, in that kind of illustration and that kind of thought process, thinking about the Gospels, at least everybody's observing the same event. They're observing the right corner, as it were, right? So if you picture if we're continuing to try to frame this up a little bit more culturally now, you picture we have summer camp going on right now at the school, and there's a Foursquare thing that's laid out on tape in our
Foursquare,
cafe,
another denomination,
right?
We
not
don't do
talking about that, right?
Oh, okay.
All right.
Never mind, my bad.
So you picture a Foursquare game thing, right? And everybody in the illustration that I just gave and that you're giving is they're facing inward toward the center of the Foursquare ring, or Foursquare square, in order to hit the ball in the right square, as opposed to doing an about face, a 180, and putting their noses in the opposite corners and not even being able to see the ball, where they can't even play the game.
Right.
So now that illustration is more of what we've seen in recent years in our culture, of folks that go to their corners, the wrong corners, their away corners, to go and, kind of gripe with the people that are in their same corner, and similar to, again, if we're going multiple illustrations here, but a boxing ring, going to your corner, talking to your people, and not actually seeing what's going on at the intersection, right?
Yeah.
And so what we want to talk about today is we want to bring people out of their corners, their nose away from each other corners, and kind of put our noses together, our heads together, and start thinking together about what true unity in diversity looks like, no matter what your vantage point may be, no matter what your experience is and where you're coming from. Here's what we know. We know in John 17, Jesus prayed a prayer of unity for his disciples that were right in front of him, and then for us later, which I've always been in awe of, just the fact that in the scriptures we have a prayer that covers you and me, so many generations removed from what actually happened back in Jesus' time. During his high priestly prayer in John 17, he says, verse 20, "I don't ask only for these, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me." That is so powerful, that Jesus would have us in mind right before the cross. Like, that's very personal to me. I don't know, but it hits real personal for me. I don't know how you receive that, but he's praying for unity for us as his future believers before he hits the cross.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the main takeaway from that for me is just the understanding that as sure as all of us, when we say the Lord's Prayer, we say "Our Father." There's no subcategorization on that. Like, it doesn't mean anything different for the homeless person as opposed to the person with the home, or the black person as opposed to the white person, or the fill in the blank. He's our Father. Likewise, when Jesus prayed that prayer, he had a design and a desire that each and every one of us that would call him our Lord and Savior would get on one accord and be on the same page with that. And to a certain point, what that really means is that we're diminishing or dismissing not ourselves. We are given an identity in Christ, and then we get to celebrate the fact that we are all different, and those things make us unique, and those things make us beautiful. But we should not be focusing on those things at the expense of the gospel and the mission and the ministry and the life of Jesus Christ that he's given us. So it's great for us to be able to recognize that that's exactly what he wants for all of us. He wants human flourishing for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah.
But I think what's happened is, and to your point, a lot of folks have, in a way, navel-gazed their way out of that situation and put themselves in their quote-unquote corners, and aren't willing to come to the revelation or the realization after seeing a prayer like that from Jesus that you can't exclude certain people because of your own preferences. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that's exactly where we are today in a lot of situations, especially in the church, which is a huge, huge problem.
Yeah, indeed. Just to lay some more foundation here, biblical foundation, Paul writes to the church in Ephesus in chapter 4. That whole first part of chapter 4 is all about unity, walk in a manner worthy of the calling in which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness and patience, bearing with one another in love. And it says, verse 3, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. And then he goes on to say there's one body, one spirit, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of over all. And then he goes on to talk about sort of the gifts, what we might call the leadership gifts in the body, the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, however you want.
Yeah. In verse 11. Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Yes, indeed.
So that unity that Paul expressed a desire for and really a command for in Ephesians 4 is carrying on what Jesus said, maintain unity, like press for unity. There's no mention of race or culture or background here, because in this case, he's saying it's all level at this point. Like there's no Jew, no Greek. We are all one in Christ, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's some celebration. We'll talk about that celebration of diversity with how we're created. But in the end, when it comes to being in Christ, we are something new, something different. So that brings us to kind of the Acts 11 piece that I've heard you talk about before. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah. No, I kind of love the kind of point of transition and the acknowledgement of that, right? Because that's really what happens first in Ephesians chapter 4. Like you missed a little tiny verse in there. I think it's verse 5, where it talks about how God is the Father of all, and He's over all and in all and through all.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And in that point right there, when He says all, what's the definition of all? All.
That's all of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so he needed to create a canvas and paint a picture with that. And I believe that's exactly what he does in Acts chapter 11. And the significance of that also is in Acts chapter 11, we'll talk about Pastor Derwin Gray, who I'm a significantly silent disciple of, but very much a disciple of. When he was working on his doctoral thesis, he began to conceptualize this understanding that in Acts chapter 11 specifically, it's the first place that you see the word Christian. And in context, what's happening is all these folks are around Antioch, and they're seeing that these believers are coming together and they're worshiping together and they're doing life together, and they're breaking bread with each other, and they might be getting married unto each other and having little mixed babies unto each other, and they're not quite sure what to call these people, and so they call them Christians. But the idea behind what he's saying, though, is he's not just saying that this is the pivot point and the creation of what we would call our faith now, the way, because we're formed and shaped out of Judaism and the Hebraic faith in the Old Testament. But what he's also saying is that this is the beginning of a new family, a new ethnicity. You know what I'm saying? And so we are legitimately brothers and sisters in Christ, regardless of what we look like or regardless of our actual background, regardless of our history. And so that's why this is to be celebrated, because, and let me go ahead and use a trigger term. We have so many folks that operate in Christianity that want to present a color blindness to it. You know what I'm saying? And Gray is big on saying, don't think color blind, think color blessed. Like there's something to celebrate about your amazing whiteness, and there's something to celebrate about my amazing blackness, because God created us that way, and He wants us to learn and understand one another and become family with each other. We'll just say the word in spite of all of those things, because right now those are significant hindrances in our culture. So I think that it is excellent that in Acts chapter 11, the first time that we see that word is also the first time that we get a full-on understanding of Him painting that picture and saying, hey, all of you belong in this family of faith. Yeah,
man, that is so beautiful. I love that, a new ethnicity. And we've often said before, our theology of the church would tell us that your church, your local church specifically, is not like family, it is family. And in this case, similarly, it's not like a new race almost. It is a new race. And it's unified around the gospel, which is certainly its central figure is Christ Himself.
Yeah, that's my favorite part, especially when people let's just have fun for a second. One of my favorite conversations that I hear frequently around this, where someone's trying to positively put a spin on why we shouldn't have the awkward conversations about unity and diversity and equity and equality and all those other words is because they say that we should just preach the gospel. Hear what I just said?
Yeah.
Just preach the gospel. Well, if we're talking about what we're talking about right now, then this is the gospel,
Yeah.
and a big part of it. And so I just thought that's usually my response. So like I am preaching the gospel. I need you to know that. I need you to understand that, though.
Because at its core, the argument of the gospel is that you are reconciled to the Father and to each other because you're reconciled
Come on
to the
now.
Father.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
we're,
yeah, yeah.
we're vertical and horizontal. So
Yeah.
it's not just a vertical reconciliation, which is often what Bible guys will do. We'll say, well, just got to focus on God, focus on God. Well, yes, but also each other. Like there's no separation here. He created you to live your life here on earth right now. There will be a future where we're only focused on him, but right now we have the beauty of being able to be saved by a good God by his grace, welcomed into a new family, and now treating one another the same way that Christ treated people when he modeled that for us here on earth.
Bearing one another's burdens. Exactly.
Yes.
That's the key word. And yeah, that's I think I preached on that one time too. It was 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Like the love chapter. And it was talking about how it's about loving God, and that's the vertical, and loving people, and this horizontal. And I know it's the disrespectful way of saying it is if you're really just focused on one or the other, because we can get too horizontal as well. Then you no longer have the cross; you just have a pole.
Yeah,
And that whole polarized piece. I think it's so beautiful, and you see how God has really put this whole thing together. And when you can acknowledge that, then it just makes it so much better, all in all, because then you get to celebrate people's cultures. We were talking about that. It's just like going to Karen's. Or Carmen's. God, there's some
Carmen's,
messages
yeah.
here. Exactly. It's just like
El Salvadorian.
Exactly. Come on, man. Like
Amazing
I love me some pupusas. Yes. Glory to God. El Espíritu Santo. Man. But what is life like if we don't have pupusas because we're so busy focused on just, let's just eat hamburgers and hot dogs. Like eventually that's going to drive you insane. And so likewise, then we get Thai food, and then we get Puerto Rican food, because that is really the food of the God. Glory to God. And all the other, German food, French food, it doesn't matter. Like if we sit up here and say that this is the only thing that matters, and we're really putting God in a box, that's what you're doing. Then you're also eliminating the opportunity to experience all that he has created. All that he has created. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, because while we take this perspective of, in our case, sort of swinging the pendulum to this place of new ethnicity, we need to recognize that in our culture that's so important. And it's not sameness, it's likeness, right?
Right, exactly.
And it's also diverse, and that is to be celebrated also. And the reason I know that is because in Revelation 7:9, there's a picture of a great multitude that no one could number.
Preach it.
From every nation of all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and they're crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And now the angels and the elders, throne room song is a good song to listen to get a I guess melodic picture of this. But man, what a beautiful picture of recognized tribes, tongues, nations, peoples, folks who look different than one another, all before the throne. And so I would argue that our then pursuit as churches ought to be a little glimpse of that, right?
Little.
We ought to be a little bit of a finger pointer to this future thing that is going to exist for all eternity, and bring the kingdom of heaven down to earth for this period of time that we're here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way to say it too. Remember,
Yes.
Jesus taught us that in his prayer: "Thy kingdom come,
Yes.
thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So yeah, I mean, and we need to be honest about it too. I'm not a numbers guy, but I have an appreciation for the stats because stats tell stories, you know. So I think about our church, I think about our land, and I think if we're being honest, I don't want us to be a super multicultural, multi-ethnic church where like it's like half and half, or just like, you know, maybe get the blend. Our area of Norfolk and OV is 32% African American. Okay, so if we end up being like 60% African American, I would actually almost say we did something wrong. But but yeah, I mean, you know, because if we're being honest, we want to encapsulate our land, you know, and so there's something to be said about you know, if you're not familiar with our area in Virginia Beach, you know, the Hilltop area, it's a vast majority Caucasian, you know, and so if you're trying to bring people in, yeah, you're probably not going to get, you know, 50% African American anyway. But even churches like that have the ability to acknowledge, hey, we still need to find maybe another church that we can partner with that's a vast majority African American, that we can come together and break bread and celebrate our quote unquote differences. You know what I'm saying? Because that's really how this is supposed to apply.
Absolutely. So you and I, we're sitting here, and you know, if folks are observing through these windows here at Coalescence Coffee Company downtown on 24th Street, they're seeing us talk, and they would not be surprised maybe to see that, oh, black guy and a white guy talking about, you know, unity, diversity. We're talking about racial things here. Okay, cool, ethnicity, all that stuff. But the reality is, a piece of diversity is also generational diversity. So we got young people and old people that you can do in a predominantly black or predominantly white environment.
Yep.
You can have multi-generational diversity, which is a good starting point to learning from different vantage points, learning from different viewpoints of people, because young people certainly think differently than old people, and getting them all in the same space and trying to do a worship environment where all of them are touched in some kind of way or are engaged in some kind of way is very difficult. Which is sort of like, you know, if I were to kind of start to get towards some of the practical side of this, it's kind of where we started at OV, was we just needed to focus on getting a multi-generational folk in the room that love each other, that care for each other, that are about unity despite their differences. And man, that was really hard for quite some time, because that is a it's not an easy pocket to stay in, because if you are coming at it from a selfish sort of viewpoint, trying to please everybody, nobody is ultimately pleased, right?
Yeah, man.
And that's, again, coming at it from a me-centered focus. That's why we have to have the mind of Christ and the humility of Christ as we approach life in our church.
Yeah, no, I'd say that beyond a shadow of a doubt. Even though I wasn't here, I can definitely recognize that in our environment, because let's really call that what it is. You're dealing with folks who are on the opposite sides of the same pendulum and have had an understanding of, quote unquote, how things are. And you know, it's the quote unquote boomers. I guess I hope that's not still a disrespectful term, but it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? And then you have the millennials, the Gen Xers, and now you have Gen Zers, and all of them have a school of thought that may have some correlation, but it's only because we're all human.
Yeah.
But the way that they want things done is not going to be the same at all. And so we have to put all of them in a space, and I love that that's what we have at our church anyways. This the operation to create the space where you can have this mindset, this mindset, put them all at the table, have a conversation, and hopefully be able to come away with something that honors all and at the same time maybe challenges all, because it ain't like any of us are 100% right, and we never will be. So we need to have that like accountability and the ability to be self-aware, in this case group aware, you know, because I love our seasoned saints. That's what we used to call them when I was a little kid, and the seasoned saints, child, hallelujah,
seasoned citizens.
You know, and then the young bucks that are coming in there too. You know, young bucks have some wisdom as well, you know, and I'll be honest, this new generation has a lot more of the emotion to be able to channel us forward and be able to relate to folks and not be dismissive as folks were back in the day, where you just had to keep a stiff upper lip and just keep your head down and okay, that might have been needed for a season, but now let's find a way to incorporate both, so that we can still honor those who came before us and really pave the way, but also make sure that we're doing so in a way that is going to position these other individuals to be able to come in and lead.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Yeah.
And lead well, what I'm saying? And to be able to appreciate, okay, maybe I could afford to have a little more poise and grit, have a little more resilience, and not just be able to bleed all over the place. I'm sorry. That's the only way I can think about it.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I think it's also helpful. Like, so if you're listening and you're maybe a part of a different church, or whether you're in the Multiply family or not, like, lock in here for a second, because we are going to talk at length in a part 2 conversation about sort of what that multi-ethnic integration looks like more so. But as we continue on to this, pressing into the diversity beyond ethnicity, I think generational diversity is the easiest one to focus in on and to try to decide and get these people in the same room to have these conversations about what does it look like for older folks to be more open-handed about walking through a new, whether it's a new pastor or whether it's new people coming in that are looking to be a part of something, but they can't. New people can't come in and feel resistance and not feel welcome, and then you expect to grow as a church. Like, it's just not going to work. You have to have a humility and a hospitable environment for these folks to walk into across generations. But added to that, another layer of diversity, if I were to start the easiest first thing, like, I'm looking to diversify our church a little bit more. We're all like 30-year-old white people. Okay. Start with generational diversity, right? You're a brand new church plant. You got 30 people in your brand new church plant, 40 people in your brand new church plant. You're looking to start integrating in diversity. Start with generational, like, try to get some older folks around, younger folks around, whatever the case may be. And the other part of it that is hard, and is because it depends on your environment, is socioeconomic diversity. So this one is difficult because people with money have different needs than people who don't have money, and everything in between, right? So you got people living paycheck to paycheck. You got people with retirement plans and pensions that are set up kind of for life financially, and you got folk that hope they get a paycheck, right? All in the same place on a Sunday morning. That's another beautiful depiction of diversity within the church that is incredibly difficult to value and maintain.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest too. Let me say this in a fun way. I think we dropped the ball. We've been praying for a lot of different things, and we've had a conversation, and I'll call it a healthy skepticism, but I think it might be borderline cynicism. I think that we've missed the prayer for a multi-economic church. We've never.
I like that word.
I don't think we've said that. We haven't said that word. I think that's one of the things that the Church of Acts gave us an excellent opportunity to witness to as well. In Acts chapters 2-4, we're bearing witness to certain things that if we don't unpack it properly, we might miss. And I think even the end of chapter 4, beginning of chapter 5, because I think that's something that speaks to the heart of the more affluent folks that we would have in our multi-economic space. You have the person that was called Barsabbas that sold a field and donated the money at the end of chapter 4, and then we all know the beginning of chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira,
Right? Yeah.
Who basically they lied on the understanding of their wealth, but that was the whole thing. They were wealthy, and we had to have those people. We had to have Lydia, who's selling the fine purple cloth, you know what I'm saying, and also leading her family to Christ in the process. We need those people. We need, let's just say the word, millionaires. We need maybe, well, I said billionaires are, I have a different view on billionaires. I think that they are hoarders. Anyway, that's me.
I hope there's some generous
Yeah,
billionaires.
these
there,
views do not reflect.
They do not.
The
they
Multiply
do not,
family.
Right. They do not come to our churches if they're out there.
No, I mean not that too. I was just saying whatever I'm saying. That's just not a full on Multiply focus. But
Yeah.
but you know we need those folks because they are the people who, if they have the right heart and mindset. Because, you know, the big conversation in a lot of denominations today is individuals who don't like what other people in their denomination are doing, and they're threatening to take their money and go someplace else. You know, if you're threatening to take your money from the church, or if you're threatening to take your money from God, is really what you're saying, then you're missing the point of why you're given the money in the first place. You are a steward. And your responsibility in that stewardship is to make sure that, you know, there's a gift of generosity. And I don't know if that's in First Corinthians 12 or if that's in Romans 12, but either way, it's in there. We're called to those things, and you're called to be a part of that community as well. And so if you're not utilizing that in that diverse space to have the people, like we got our guy, his name is Rick at our church. We know that Rick provides such a joy and a gift to our church. Rick is poor. Rick is he's impoverished. We're not expecting him to bring the real tithe to the church, but we are glad to have him in our space. Subsequently, though, we would love to have a millionaire who understands that being able to have himself and Rick in our space would be the perfect opportunity to bear witness to the community of how this beloved community and how this relationship piece is supposed to apply, and the unity and diversity therein as well. Like, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. It's not just about race. It's not just about class. It was about class. I guess that's there, but you know, it's the intricacies of it. It's the nuances of it, right?
Yeah. And you're right about when you were referring to the Acts church, I was thinking just the line, all things in common, right? Like folks that lived in a way that had means were helping those who did not. And there is a clear pattern that is, I would say probably more descriptive in a sense, but it's still there very clearly throughout the entire book, where people within the body of Christ are loving one another, caring for one another, and that doesn't just mean for their health, their physical health.
Come
right?
on now.
It means
Come
also
on.
for their economic
All
health
right.
too. And so that's why when we use the language at our churches, we typically say time, talent, table, and treasure, because these are the ways that we can be generous. That with obviously time, like spending time with people of a different whatever diversity it is, whether it's age or race or whatever the case. Talent, giving your gifts and talents to the church, if that's very clear in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14 is very, very laid out there. Table, what we mean by that is sitting across from one another, sharing a meal. There's a great book, I think I mentioned it on here before, by a guy named Tim Chester called A Meal with Jesus. And it just goes through the sort of the theology of meals and how Jesus did a whole lot around a table. And it's one of the reasons why we started a coffee shop years ago, is to create a table for people to meet with people. And of course, treasure is the final and it tends to be the most obvious, at least in a gathering of believers. And on Sunday morning, they expect to be pointed to the offering at some point. So anyway, all that to say, like, this challenge to integrate diversity within the church comes from multiple different places and directions. It's not just race. Once again, we're going to talk at length about that. But we've got this generational standpoint. We've got this socioeconomic standpoint where we're caring for one another's needs there as well. And you know, Jesus also said you're always going to have the poor among you, but the
Matthew chapter 26.
right. So that there is a sense that there will always be poor people. It's not about making everyone equal. It's about seeing everyone's differences, facing your nose into the corner of the Foursquare. What is it? It's not a court. what is it? I keep messing this up.
Dog,
Four square, square, whatever, you know what I'm
there you
saying.
go. That works.
And actually addressing one another's needs. There's gender diversity is another easy one. Like there should be guys and gals, and recognizing, by the way, and championing the differences between guys and gals that come into your church, whether they're young or old or everything in between. God created it, and it's beautiful that we have men and women that are a part of this church in their varying roles in service to the body. Like that is beautiful, and we should celebrate that, to be sure. Some other kind of random ones, like education, right? Like some folks that have a educational diversity is good.
Jesus, I think that one is probably it's a bigger conversation than anyone's giving it credit for.
In the church, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in certain, we'll say doctrinal spaces or maybe denomination spaces, because, we were talking about that before too, especially in the black church and even in the white church. So in certain places, they honor the understanding of the call, but don't necessarily facilitate that with or correlate that with academic space that goes with it. They don't honor the seminary. As a matter of fact, there's the term anti-intellectualism has been running rampant in certain circles these days. And there is, in my purview, there's an understanding, especially biblically, that there's a both and component to that. Like, I'm not expecting everybody to have a full-on education. We know that some folks work with their hands and they do that in an amazing way. They have this thing called athletic intelligence where, athletes aren't designed to know 2 + 2 well. We don't want to call them dumb jocks, but they can do certain things that a lot of people cannot do. And it's a form of intelligence. And so, but I do think that there's a both and component to it. When I say that from a biblical standpoint, it is the thought process of seeing Paul. He's the easiest example. Knowing that he was trained under an individual by the name of Gamaliel, who seemed to be the teacher of teachers. He was the rabbi of rabbis in the Pharisaical camp, who also subsequently, remember, he's the only person that when Peter and I forget who it was, Peter and John maybe or something like that, were being imprisoned in the beginning of Acts. He was the first one to tell them, y'all, let these dudes go. If this is not a move of God, if this is not a move of God, it will come to an end. But if it is, you're not going to be able to stop it, and you will be fighting against God. That he's that guy.
Yeah.
But also, Paul wasn't just the guy who was trained under the trainer of trainers. He was the only person who received direct revelation from Jesus a couple of times. The first time he got knocked off his donkey onto his donkey, and in Acts chapter 9, but also in Galatians chapter 1 verse 11, he's the only one who received direct and divine revelation from God as well. And we have all of these folks in these Christian circles today who believe that divine revelation is the way to go, like the only way to go. And that also tells me they're not opening and reading their Bible. Which is a problem. And my belief is, in order to really receive revelation from God, we have to continuously stay in this thing with everything that we are, because Paul already did that part.
Right. So I liked what you were saying. In order to receive revelation from God, we've got to be in that which was already revealed.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And just like back to the church in Acts, in chapter 2, learning under the apostles' teaching. We have before us in the scriptures the apostles' teaching that is the foundation for all of it. I am not a full-on cessationist, and we don't have to have that conversation.
Good job, man. Good job.
But I do believe that God can still speak today. I just wouldn't canonize it and give it to everybody in the world to hear, because we have that already, right? And so, but the Lord can still reveal to his people, but it's never going to be inconsistent with his word that already is there, right?
Exactly.
And so, in fact, it's going to just build upon what's already been built over the last almost 2,000 years of the church history. And so, I think this is a great place to just sort of push pause and as a foundational element for this part 1 of unity and diversity, just to say, like, this is it, right? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about generational diversity, socioeconomic diversity, educational diversity, even, we didn't talk much about this, but personality and experience diversity, like that.
Introvert diversity.
Right. Introverts, extroverts, all the people that
I think it was probably a good idea that we didn't do that.
Right. And we kind of have before, like when we talk about gifts in the church,
Yeah.
When Pastor Caleb was on in the first season, we talked at length about that. There's beauty in diversity. That's the picture we want you to see today. And in the next part, we're going to talk very specifically about how that's worked out at our church, in our own lives and our own experiences, and get a little bit more personal, and maybe, I guess, practical or story oriented in this next part here. So I just want to land the plane today just by saying you've been listening to the Behind Open Doors podcast, where we take you behind the scenes, discovering what it takes to multiply disciples, leaders, and new churches. Let the word dwell richly in you, and may God multiply your efforts for the kingdom. See you in part 2.